Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. I am Kylie Timler with Kirkwood Corporate Training. And today we have Sandra Flikkema joining us to present a teaser on her upcoming flexible and innovative training, or FIT as we call it, presentation on the power of failure. This presentation in its entirety will be on Thursday, November 4th from 9 a.m. to noon virtually. After today's presentation, if you'd like to learn more about how to attend that session with Sandra or any other session, please give corporate training a call at 319-398-5623, or you can email us at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu. I would like to also highlight that Sandra does a lot of training on her own. So if you would like to bring her in-house on this topic or any other topic, we can definitely help you arrange all of those things as well. I just want to take a quick moment here and introduce Sandra. Sandra delivers a unique combination of experience in coaching, training, and career management, leading managers to make strategic changes in communication, business, and relational skills. Throughout her career, she has partnered with directors, managers, and professionals to leverage their full career potential using practical skill-building techniques to support their business results. Sandra began her career in human resources and consulting in the Chicago area. Her training expertise includes upgrading customer service, resiliency, change management, coaching, and leadership skills, and career management. She has a master's degree in organizational communication and is knowledgeable and a trusted advisor to help clients reach optimal performance and success. Sandra, we're so excited to have you here today and presenting on the power of failure. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone, please feel free to use that chat. We will be doing a live Q&A with Sandra, so have your questions ready, or if something is really resonating with you, feel free to share that. And at the end, I will let Sandra know all of those awesome questions and feedback. So without further ado, Sandra, if you'd like to get started, that would be fantastic.
I would love to. Thank you for that introduction, Kylie. And hopefully everybody is able to hear me all right. I would recommend pulling up your chat, making sure that it says to everyone there in the bottom, because I'd love to hear from you when we do a little bit going forward. So I know we're on a tight time schedule, so we're going to talk about the incredible power of failure. I'm going to give you an outline today, and like we said, coming up here in November, the full class. So today is a little bit of a preview for the incredible power of failure, and I'm excited to speak with you today. So thanks for joining. All right, so first we're going to start with a little bit of an outline here. You know, what is a sit rep? So when we're talking about failure, it's kind of the F word in business, right? It's not certainly a word we like to use. And it's certainly not something that I recommend people when I'm doing my career coaching and career management expertise that I recommend that they use in their job interviews for sure. But in reality, failure is not always bad, right? It's also not always good. There's sometimes been a little bit of a push that, you know, it's great to fail. Entrepreneurs should fail. You know, entrepreneurs will fail at least, I think they say 3.8 times before they will succeed on average, and all of those things. But that's not always true, right? There's actually a scale of failure types, and it does run into something that we want to talk about. And so we will talk about the most detrimental to the most beneficial. So bad and good, when I think about that, bad can be detrimental to our career or our lives, but there is definitely good as well. And that's certainly where we're going to concentrate, and those that are beneficial to us in our full class. So when there is failure, when we experience failure, when somebody experiences failure, what does it tend to lead to in the human condition, right? It tends to lead to fear, and we call this the fear cycle. This is actually something that comes out on the books that I use as a base, which I'm going to share with you as well. But the fear cycle is a little bit nasty, right? From fear of failing again in that same area, we might have inaction. In other words, we don't want to do it again, which leads, unfortunately, to inexperience. And then no ability is gained, right? And the fear failure continues. The fact of the matter is that fear is not actually all that bad. It depends on what we do with it. So fear is certainly a natural human condition. It's about viewing it differently. In November, we'll take a look at these and try to identify where we're seeing it in our own lives. What are the spots where we have fear, where we are seeing in action. In fact, we'll talk about what this looks like so that you can spot a little bit better in your own careers and perhaps in your personal life and some of the goals that you have. Because inaction can look like paralysis, procrastination, or purposelessness. And an experience leads to that as well. So we will dive into those a little bit more in November as well. But we definitely want to spot where these things are. In other words, take a little bit of a look back. Sometimes people think about responses to failure as fight or flight. That's like when we run into something we don't like, right? We fight or flight. This cycle is flight. This is running. This is staying away from that which scares us. Not always the best option. Now I'm going to have you think about your chat here in a little bit. So before I show you the next slide, I want to ask you a question. Have you drop just a couple of numbers here in chat? For those of you who played sports or had a major something that you pursued in your years, whether that's recently or perhaps a little bit longer ago, what percentage, give me the ratio of practice to performance? What would you say was the amount of effort you had to put into something in order to perform on meet or game day? What do you think? What are the numbers that come to mind as far as the ratio? Is it 50-50? Is it something else? Give me your ratios and drop some of those in chat. I'd love to see what you think, especially if you had this experience where you had to work really hard for something and then you had game day, right? You had performance day when you played sports. Anybody have some ideas? 80-20, says Kim. Yeah. Anybody else? I don't know if you're like me, I'm drinking hot tea today. It's cold. All right. Go ahead and keep dropping them in there if you get onto your chat. But tell me what you think about this, right? There is the part that we see, right? And I have a varsity swimmer right now, so I know that this is very true. And this is the part that we don't see. Drop in chat, what are some of the words that you see that we've already talked about here under the surface? Anybody see those? Does anybody notice these ones? I'll show them to you. Here's one, and it's pretty close to the top, right? It's pretty close to the surface. What we don't see is when there has been failure. We're cheering and we're showing the pictures on Facebook of certainly the wonderful times, but we definitely don't always show the parts, or we don't see the parts that are under there. And there's a lot of stuff under here, right? Pain, injury, lots of things that are really unfortunate and sad, but also take a look here. We also have fear, right? Fear of failure, fear of looking bad, and fear of trying something new. That's absolutely a part of accomplishing anything. What's interesting is that we expect this a little bit. I don't think any of you are too surprised that this is true in sports, right? Practice is where the work happens. What we don't tend to do is think about this in terms of work. Why do we not bring this into our career? Why do we expect perfection all the time when we know that practice is what actually leads to the finished product, right? So for example, right? There is fear. There's lots of actions here, lots of experience. And because of that, though, there's abilities and achievement. So we need to keep that in mind as we think about our careers as well. All right. The next part that we will talk about, especially in the full class, is move. Persistence over subsisting, right? Barely making it, or resisting, completely trying not to deal with something new or change. Persistence is really where it is. And that means continuing to move. In fact, we'll talk about how mistakes and failures are essential to achievement and fulfillment as mostly forward action, right? Simply because we're moving, sometimes not even in the right direction. But if we never move off of this point, off of this mistake, we are never going to go anywhere. And that's what we're going to dwell on. So in fact, failure can be seen as, and mistakes can be seen as stepping stones that we need in order to get across the stream, in order to make progress towards our goals on the other side, whether that is career goals or things like that. Okay. So think about this when you've talked about, when you think about failure being something that we accept in other areas. For example, and this is personal too, right? But getting to 20 push-ups, I couldn't do it if I didn't start with one, right? Or more. And there's only one way to start, and that's to go to fail. And that is something that my personal trainer always used to tell me is you must continue all the way until you fail, because it will be a little bit better the next time. Toddlers learning to walk, right? When a child is learning to walk, we don't say, oh, you fell, you suck, you're terrible. Obviously, that's not the way to encourage them to learn. And then think about a rough draft. Let's say you think about the last time you had to write a paper or a presentation or a report that was going to be presented to somebody who was in management or upper levels. You cannot get to a final, really good piece on your first try. You have to rough draft, right? And show it to other people and get the red marks and work on it. Rough draft is essential, just like failure and mistakes and anything where we need to try things out in order to get to the final piece. We need to accept this more in our work as well. And another visual for you, think about moving water. Moving water is clean. You can drink it. Let's say you were walking across a stream on some stepping stones. If you fail or make a mistake and drop into that water, it's not going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to you, right? You might learn something, wet shoes. I'm going to bring different shoes next time, or better ones. I'm going to bring a walking stick, something along those lines. But think about if that water is stagnant. Think about stagnant water. What do we know to be true about unmoving water? It stinks. There are mosquitoes. There is bacteria and slime. There is stuff that in there that is not good for you, and you definitely do not want to be in it. All right, nor do you want to be it. In other words, movement is better, and that is true in our careers, in our abilities, and our ability to grow, and our desire to grow as well. Of course, you've heard of plenty of stories. We're going to talk about these in more detail during the class, but there are definitely a lot of stories of failure. Babe Ruth, the famous, of course, home run king, actually had twice as many strikeouts as he did home runs. So he would have to strike out twice, which is a failure, in order to get to his next home run. And he said that. He's like, I just figure every strikeout is getting me closer to my next home run, right? Missions to Mars, we hear about the successes. Do you know how many failures we've had? So we've had 19 successes. We've had 28 failures. And we did not learn by not trying. They weren't perfect on the first try. Vera Wang, the famous fashion and dress designer, desperately wanted to be an ice skater at the Olympics and tried for quite a while to do so. She ended up saying, you know what, that is not what I'm going to be able to do, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to quit. I'm going to pursue another passion, and has become obviously quite wealthy and famous in doing so. And there's many, many more examples like that. What we're going to do during class is take a deep dive into our own, right? And see where we have actually learned from our past and from failures. I don't know if anybody here has seen The Maze Runner. It's certainly a favorite of my 14-year-old and has been for some years. I don't know how many times she's seen it, but the Maze Runner series, both books and movies, follows a group of teens, and it's always about teens saving the world, right? And adults who are either killed off or parents are unneeded, which we have joked about plenty in our house. But the Maze Runner is really key for this group of teens who have to continue to go into this maze and fail and fail and fail in order to map it, in order to find the route through, right? Sometimes I think we think of it that way if we have a little bit of a better view. So I'm trying to give you some visuals to help you get closer to believing in the end goal, knowing and absolutely having a firm belief in that end goal, allowing us to continue to fail. We're going to dive into that a little bit deeper as well. The next part that we'll talk about is how shift happens, right? This is my fun slide. We need to learn. In other words, the paradigm shift is, instead of failure leading me to the fear cycle, I'm going to let failure lead me to learning. Okay. Julius Caesar famously said, experience is the teacher of all things. The best teacher is your last mistake, Ralph Nader. And good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment, according to Rita Mae Brown, right? So there's some really fun quotes here, but we're going to take a deep dive into our experience and really say, okay, really, what did I learn? Would I toss that away? Or was there value in that for where I am today and to how I can carry that forward? In fact, can I hold on to that process and decide that instead of a failure leading me to fear, I'm going to let it lead me to learning and believe that that is definitely going to happen. Okay. Soren Kierkegaard, a philosopher from a couple hundred years ago, said life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forwards. Never something truer in this case, right? We'll take a look backwards so that we can look forward. And I do career coaching. So I will just throw this in, kind of related to the stagnant water visual, that it is very true that in interviewing, and those of you who are hiring managers know this too, experience is what you want to hear about. And if we never do anything, we're not going to have experience to talk about. So this is definitely true in our professional lives as well. Okay. I don't see any questions yet. I don't know if anybody here watches Ted Lasso. My husband and daughter are huge fans. I have not watched much of Ted Lasso. I tend to watch other things. I watch a lot of volleyball and some other things like that, but they are loving Ted Lasso. So I don't know if anybody here is watching Ted Lasso, but my daughter just ordered a t-shirt that said, "Be a goldfish." If that's familiar to any of you, Ted Lasso gives a speech in, I believe it's season 1, where they have just lost a game, the soccer team that he's coaching. And he tells them to be a goldfish. In other words, forget about it, right? There supposedly is a rumor that goldfish only have a 10-second memory. That has since been, of course, that has been proven untrue, but they act like they have a 10-second memory in many cases, and let it go and move forward, because we have to keep swimming, right? In the case of failure and mistakes, there is some part of that is true, right? The emotional piece of it, but we can use our paradigm shift to learn from it. In other words, I don't want people to forget about it. When we have a failure or a mistake or something that we have not done as well, we actually don't want to forget about it. We want to use it. We want to use it, okay? Letting go of the emotion piece of it takes time, but if we can find some lessons in it, we can deal with that as well and get ourselves more quickly through that grief process, more quickly through that emotional piece of failure. So we don't want to forget about it. We want to use experiences to learn. All right. Destination success. So the last part that we'll talk about in class 2 is, so what do we do with this knowledge? If we have proven to ourselves, personally, as well as theoretically, from the experts, as it were, that failure is not always bad. In fact, there's a lot of benefits to our career and to our personal lives to allow for that to happen. And then maybe even to cultivate it, the beneficial kinds of failure and experimentation, right? How do we fail faster? You'll see articles, and this is a little bit of a buzzword in the business community. How do we fail forward so that we can move towards our destination, towards something that we desire or a goal that we have? Let's talk about that, right? Number 1, it's active. Again, it's moving, but we have to actively search for. You often hear the phrase, he found success. She found success. I'm looking for success in this area. That word find or found, right? That's not inactive. It is a search for success that may be for a time on the wrong path, but we may need to try some parallel paths. We won't know if we're on the wrong path if we don't follow it for a while. So we have to go out searching for success. And that is how we fail forward. And our most important skill when we're on that journey, when we're trying to figure out which way to go and if this path is the right one or not, what do you think that is? Anybody have some ideas that they want to drop in chat? What's our most important skill when we are searching for success? Whether that's a goal. Any thoughts? Flexibility, says Kim. Getting close. It's definitely one of the words that gets close to it. Other thoughts? Yeah, critical thinking, being open. Yeah, these are all excellent ways to continue to think forward. What is it going to take? Well, a lot of what you said is actually included in the definition of this one, right? Curiosity, says Aaron. Grit. Grit is a term that has become, of course, popular in the last 5 or 7 years, but there's a reason for that. It's because it includes a lot of those actions. It's a skill that you develop from those actions, being flexible, being open, being curious, those characteristics that you have mentioned here in chat, right? Grit is courage, bravery, pluck, mettle, backbone, spirit, strength of character, steel, nerve, fortitude. It's just continuing to go forward, right? We're going to take a look at what grit is as a formula. Okay, how is it actually happening? There is a formula for that. And where we ourselves are at personally. I don't know about you, but I've got 2 kids, and in many ways, they're very similar. Certainly, they've been raised in the same household. But I will tell you one way in which I noticed they were different very early on, right? We had one time there was a ball stuck way up high on top of the drapery bar. And I remember this kind of clearly because my son, who is older, and said, he looked at it and he's like, it's too high, right? And he walked away. He didn't care. He was ready to let it go. My daughter studied it. She was very small at the time, no longer small, but she was very small at the time, but she tried about 4 or 5 different things. She bent a hanger. She stood on things. And I just kind of watched because I was so fascinated by how different my kids were, right? I have one who's very much a test taker. He's an academic. He's extremely smart. And he's learned to be, but he had to cultivate being more gritty. The other one seems to have had it from birth. Failure doesn't bother her at all. She just moves on to the next try, right? And that's something that we've really tried to show to the other child, right? And cultivate in ourselves as well. I know when I found it in myself, and that was when I learned to travel around Europe. We lived in Germany with John Deere. My husband works for John Deere for a time, almost 4 years. And I learned from traveling with small children, sometimes by myself, to places where I knew nobody or the language, that I could develop grit very often. And now I feel very firm in my knowledge of, I may not know how to do this action. I may not know where we are going to end up, but I know that I will figure it out on the way. And I've developed that confidence from experimentation, right? And a lot of that started with me traveling around Europe because I learned that I would figure it out. And I started to be confident in the fact that whether I knew or not ahead of time, it was something that was going to happen in the end. That's grit, right? And something we can absolutely cultivate, especially if it's already a strength. But even if it isn't, it can be cultivated. So how do we get grittier? These are some of the practical pieces that we're going to attack and go after during the class in November. There are 4 ways that we'll talk about: time, scheduling, asking, giving, and accepting. And I'll get into those details in November, but I'll give you a little bit of a taste now. Google famously used to give everybody, and they still do this in some way, and there's many companies who do this as well, 20% of their time was supposed to be for new ideas, experimentation, creativity, work on something that is completely wild, and then try it. And lots of great products and ideas came out of that. It was permission to experiment time. And there are companies that are getting smarter about giving permission to fail, scheduling that in, encouraging that in a way, right? So time specifically, and of course, let me go back just a second here. If you don't get that automatically from your company, okay, you can schedule it yourself and you can ask for it. And we'll talk about how we do that, and we'll get very practical during November. Permission, give it freely, right? Permission to make mistakes instead of expecting perfection in our jobs when we don't necessarily expect it in the rest of our lives. We must allow for it in people because, quite honestly, we are about as far from perfect as we can get. And we need to allow them into our professional lives as well. It's only one way to face fear, people. I'm afraid to tell you that it is experiencing the thing, or at least the beneficial parts, okay, of what we are afraid of. So my son graduates from high school this year, and his graduation trip as our family before he goes off to college is that we're going to go on a 6-day whitewater rafting trip. We're all actually pretty excited. It's going to be a little bit scary. We're going out to Idaho, and it's going to be awesome, right? We all actually really enjoy that. My daughter, who is 3 years away from graduation, has already put on the calendar that we are going skydiving as a family. In fact, she has, I believe, on the calendar, family yeet from airplane, which is horrifying. That is terrifying. That is the one thing that I never, ever want to do. But she's been talking about it for years. She wants to do it as a family. And I'm starting to figure out how can I get there, because I know that I get angry and I do not like to be afraid of things. And that's terrifying to me. But I also know that once you do something, it is a lot less terrifying based on our experience. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in more detail, and we will as well in the full class. And then finally, we'll talk about how do you practically celebrate the passion and the perseverance, not the result, not the miss. How do we focus on the process of experimentation, of allowing for failure, instead of the result? Because we know we have that belief in the end result of success. So those are the pieces that we're going to go after there as well. All right. And that is what we're going to talk about in November. And I just gave you an outline today. Thank you so much. I hope you will join me on November 4th. The books that we are going to be using some pieces of as well are from John Maxwell, Failing Forward, and Angela Duckworth, Grit. And maybe you've read these, they're terrific. We're going to pull out some of those practical pieces and go after it. So I hope you'll join me, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I was trying to capture some places that I really enjoyed, and it's hard to pick one, but I love the many paths to success. We all have the ability to cultivate grit if it's not something we naturally excel at, which I love. And I think it's really important to focus on the result, not the miss. I just think those are all really cool things and takeaways from today's quick little preview. And I just love that idea of celebrating the process and not necessarily the result, because we've all had things that went sideways and maybe didn't lead us down the path we thought. So thank you so much, Sandra. That was amazing. And I want to thank all of our attendees as well for your time. I want to remind everyone we are going to have Sandra stay on just a little bit longer to answer any questions you may have. And for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to participate in the Q&A, please register for the Zoom session. And again, if you'd like to join us at Sandra's session on November 4th, or bring her in-house on this topic or any other, feel free to give us a call at corporate training. That number is 319-398-5623, or you can send us an email at corporatetraining@kirkwood.edu. Again, Facebook Live viewers, thank you so much. And for our Zoom folks, if you'd like to go ahead and ask any questions, go ahead and do so. All right. So Sandra, one question that came in was, and I know you're going to talk about this in the deeper or in the bigger session, but if you have someone or maybe yourself is just really stuck in that fear place, and the only way for them to kind of get moving again is to just focus on the experience, how can we help them maybe take that first step?
The first step is to prove it to ourselves by looking a little bit backwards and saying, okay, let's talk about why you have this fear in the first place, right? And that's to say, well, here's what happened and here's what made me scared. So we take a look back and say, well, what did you learn? What would you do differently the next time, right? So that you can ensure that you can try it again. So we talk about that specifically. So it's a little bit of taking a look back, which I guess is sort of half of step one. And the other one is, let's really detail what you learned or could learn from this experience in order to make the next try a little bit closer, and then go forward and try it. And definitely something that we will dive into. Absolutely.
I love it. Any of our viewers, do you guys have any additional questions? It looks like you're getting a lot of great feedback in the chat room. They're excited about the info. Guys are a quiet group today. That's okay.
All right.
Well, very good. If anyone would like to join us, or if you think of a question later, feel free to just email that over to corporate training, all one word, @kirkwood.edu. And Sandra, I look forward to seeing you on November 4th.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.